One big motivation for me is, of course, that I work in an area where I can develop useful medicines, useful drugs, innovation that is useful for society. So this gives me a sense of purpose. And I think this is also what the team members appreciate, that, in the area that we are working, that we are active, we can make a difference for people who are in need, patients. And I always imagine, well, I could be a patient myself. And if I don't have the appropriate treatment or the appropriate drug, I might actually die. So there's a little bit also selfishness in here, that I say, well, the innovation that I develop is not only helpful for other patients, it could be helpful for myself, maybe for my family, for someone in my immediate environment. So that is a big motivation for me to continue. And of course, there's another motivation. This is very clear that every entrepreneur has to have, because otherwise one could do academic research as well. There's, of course, always the opportunity, if you develop something that is really useful and provides a solution for the society, for the benefit of patients, that this can turn into, financial success. It's, of course, very rewarding to also see that, the hard work is being recognized at the end by a big pharma partner, and the solution is being bought by a company and developed further. It's actually even nice to see that, the NBE Therapeutics that was purchased by Boehringer Ingelheim has vastly expanded the team and the activities around the platform and the products that we have handed over to Boehringer Ingelheim, and is making this a big part of their pharma research. So this is, of course, very rewarding to see. And, certainly motivation is that this, at the end of the day, the hard work is also financially paying off for the family, for yourself personally. I think if you're not in also a little bit for the profit that you can make, then you shouldn't become an entrepreneur. Well, the question whether the why has changed over time, I would not say so. I always had this purpose or this drive to develop an innovation that is helpful for patients and for society. As I said, always imagining that I myself or family members could be patients themselves, especially in the area of cancer where I'm focused on. You see that you're losing family members, good friends. That for me is enough motivation to continue. And this is my biggest sense of purpose. Also now starting my third company. After the success with the second company, I could potentially retire. But I see that with the cellular therapies that we are currently developing, we will make a big difference for many patients in the future. That's a good question about kind of the workload and the energy that you have to put in and how to keep the motivation. I think there is no 100% recipe for this, except that I would recommend one has to take breaks from time to time. And breaks meaning really winding down entirely for a week or two, really spending time with the family, and coming back with a refreshed mind. As an entrepreneur, you usually don't have a 9-to-5 job. Your work usually doesn't stop at 5 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. So very often you have to invest a lot of time and energy. And yes, it is draining, but of course, having this purpose, why you're developing all of this and why you're working so hard, if you have that sense that it will be helpful at the end for others, and potentially also for your family, I think this is motivation enough, and then I think you can prevent a burnout. I think if you have a scientific education, if you have made your way through a PhD thesis, maybe starting with a master thesis, a PhD thesis, potentially some postdoctoral research work, there's also a high degree of self-motivation and intrinsic motivation to continue and to become successful. And I think this intrinsic kind of motivation is, well, required in order to be successful as an entrepreneur, because it's connected also to the persistence that you have to have and the resilience that we talked about before in order to overcome, well, apparently unsurmountable obstacles. I think that is an oxymoron. I think if there's an obstacle, there's always a way to overcome it, or if there's a challenge, there's a way around it. So no, you have to have that intrinsic motivation. I think that's a key element of being an entrepreneur, and not going quickly into depression and desperation that it's all too difficult and there will not be a solution. There's always a solution. I mean, if I finished a project, usually in the course of the project, I have already 3, 4, 5 additional ideas, and it's almost a little bit of a decision point then which ones to pursue next. So I never had actually this feeling that I was running out of ideas or solutions or projects that could be really interesting and could be a benefit for society, for patients. Already now, while I'm building the third company, I mean, additional ideas are coming up. But of course, you need to stay focused. You cannot do everything at the same time. So one has to prioritize certain activities and projects at a given time. At least in my personal case, I don't see that I will fall into a black hole without any ideas because there's too much to do and too much to solve. So I hope that as much as my powers are there and my age permits, I can continue working in this field. I think curiosity is an important part of keeping the motivation. So if you're curious how to address a certain issue, a certain challenge, I think that keeps your motivation also very high, especially if you have a little bit of a red line throughout your career and life. And in my case, it was always in connection with developing biologics or antibody-based targeted therapies, and mostly in the area of cancer, which I think is something really worthwhile doing. And even if my last company is developing CAR T cells, which is considered a cell and gene therapy approach, it still employs antibodies as the targeting moiety. So a little bit ironically, I could say my first company was dealing with antibodies. My second company was dealing with toxic substances, linking them to antibodies. And now I'm linking entire cells to antibodies, but always for the same purpose, namely to target effective mechanisms to tumor cells in order to fight cancer. In your environment or in your team, I mean, you might have not always optimists who basically say, well, this is all crap and it will never work. I think it's always important that you keep the discussion then on a factual basis and not let it become an emotional discussion. One actually has to lay out potential solutions and basically also convincing then those persons to say, well, if we are not trying a certain avenue or idea that we have, we will never figure out. So we cannot give up without having tried at least 1 or 2 solutions that, always exist for a particular challenge. And this usually gets them. And then if you have proven after some time that you find actually ways around certain obstacles, and this could be also something that, well, the obstacle is still there, but you get around it rather than solving it, then you gain their understanding and also their trust, and they become usually a little bit more optimistic because they learn out of experience that, there's a way forward. All this intrinsic motivation is nice, and having ideas and innovation is also nice, but without team members who join you on the journey, this would be a futile exercise. You need to have colleagues, partners with whom you feel you have a common ground. So it's this complementary expertise that is very helpful, but it's this shared vision, this shared philosophy that we want to build something together, and that we build this, well, as partners and not as someone who is leading and the other ones are following. I think leadership is involving that you maneuver the company or the team in hard times, when things really get difficult, that then you keep the motivation also for your team members. But vice versa, it has always been the team that motivated me to also continue for the benefit of the team and for this shared vision, this shared philosophy that we want to move things forward and want to be successful together. And this feeling of togetherness, I mean, that's also, well, on top of the intrinsic motivation, extremely important. And I value that very highly. But that entails, as I mentioned before, that one is really transparent and honest with the team, so that everyone knows what he or she is in, what the challenges are, and how we can together overcome them. If everyone is really informed and knows what is lying ahead of us or the team, then well, the right performance can be achieved. I mean, without a team, without someone who helps you along the way, it's impossible to do things alone. It's not possible. I think it's very important to have the endorsement and the support of your immediate environment, your partner, your spouse, and your family. If you have a family or a spouse that is where you are constantly torn between the needs of, let's say, your family and your spouse and the needs of your project, your company, and your team, then this can be quite destructive. And this can actually then lead to, well, phases of demotivation or maybe even burnout, because you cannot deal or you cannot make a compromise or align the two different forces that pull at you. I was very lucky with my spouse, with my wife. I think that was not the plan before, because I got to know her during undergraduate studies. So of course there was not yet a plan to start a company. No, I was very lucky to, well, have a wife who is a hard worker herself, who is a scientist herself, who has worked in pharma company, who knows drug development. So we could also talk at home about certain challenges, and I could get feedback, motivation also from my wife and the family. You somehow have to figure out yourself if being an entrepreneur and going through phases of challenges, of hard work, also disappointment potentially and failure, whether that is something that motivates you to find the right solution at a given point of time, or whether you would rather like to have a, let's say, more comfortable life and being in a, let's say, safer environment where your paycheck comes in no matter what. It's very hard to give an advice whether there is kind of almost a litmus stick that you can say, well, if it's blue, then it's okay. If it's red, it's not okay. I think this is what I said at the beginning. One has to do it and try it out, and then you will figure out if this is the right thing for you or not. I would not say that I was a born entrepreneur. I think I mentioned at the beginning that I had to do a lot of learning by doing, and then needed to, well, get some theoretical training with additional crash courses in business and administration. So I had to learn quite a number of things, how to, well, kind of manage a company, how to manage teams and lead teams, and how to operationally set up a company outside of an academic environment. What I didn't have to learn is, well, how to motivate myself. I think I was always self-motivated without any external support there.